I am Langley, the one cast aside by my own family, all because of an inheritance. They didn't invite me to the family reunion. They never mentioned my name when they sold the house my father left behind. They deliberately erased me from the family. But they forgot one thing. I am no longer the little girl hiding behind the door. I'm the one holding the will now, and I've come back not to ask for a place, but to reclaim what they thought I had left behind. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and don't F-subsc. So why? Stay with us as the story unfolds. There's still so much more to discover ahead. Everyone was there, of course, Helena glowing at 41 with her yacht club husband and 2 photogenic children, Aunt Janelle from Savannah, Uncle Rory in that faded fishing hat that turned up in every holiday photo, even cousin Lila, who once stole my prom dress and swore the zipper was broken when I found it stretched around her frame. But not me. No. Ris Langley, no typo version of me, just empty air where I might have stood. Exclusion never screams. It hums steady like a refrigerator you stop hearing until a power outage reminds you of the silence. I sat in my glass office in Santa Monica, 33, director of corporate foresight, a corner view drenched in Pacific sun. I fought hard to earn, yet the room felt colder than boardroom air conditioning can explain. I reread the email, then glanced at the turquoise shell perched on my shelf, the one my father Frederick handed me at 9, and said, "You think in tides, Iris, don't let them teach you to shrink." I tried to close the laptop, almost succeeded. Instead, I opened a new tab and typed the name of the family beach house on St. Eulalia Island. Whitewashed planks porch swing that crooned in wind. Last place I saw Dad laugh, before the stroke slowed his words. There it was, not a rental listing, but a for sale price. Reduced seller motivated, handled by the same agent who buried Grandma's property 8 years earlier. No group chat announcement, no, just voicemail. They were erasing history the same way they had erased me, quietly, confidently, as if the coast would roll over the memory. I wasn't angry, yet anger needs oxygen and shock starves. I printed the docs called Sienna. My college roommate turned property lawyer and scheduled a late call with Savannah, my childhood neighbor turned paralegal spy, who still slipped me screenshots of family threads that forgot to include me. Sienna ran the title search in minutes. "Brace yourself," she said. "Your father's trust has a fallback clause if taxes or insurance lapse secondary beneficiary, meaning you can claim the deed without contest." Turns out Helena and Mom Miriam in her linen pearls let both lapse last quarter. Not malice, just the arrogance of people who assume paperwork folds itself. I stared at the shell again, felt salt memories scratch behind my eyes. Dad had built me a back door I never knew existed. Sienna's voice softened. "If you want the house, Iris, it's yours. No fight required." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a blank spreadsheet listed stock options, rainy day liquid, and the emergency fund labeled Plan C. The one I created the first time Helena reposted a family photo with my body cropped out. I wasn't rich, but I was solvent. The kind of solvent that makes people call you lucky instead of disciplined. 2 days later, I called the agent. She mispronounced my surname until I said Langley Whitford, daughter of Frederick. Her tone flipped to reverent surprise. "Oh, you're the other one." "Yes," I said, "the other one." Under the fallback clause, we closed fast, quiet, no headlines. No cousins whispering over shrimp cocktails, just notarized ink and the soft click of ownership changing hands. That night, I booked the master suite for retreat weekend under Miss I. Langley special requests: firm pillows, cotton sheets, privacy, and a bottle of Perrier Jouet on ice. When the confirmation pinged, I didn't smile or cry. I simply exhaled the way cliffs exhale when they let a centuries-old boulder fall at last. I arrived the Friday before they did dawn glaze painting the cedar roof. The house looked smaller, or maybe I finally stood at full height. The porch swing still crooked lantern replaced by a cheap solar bulb, blinking like a tired firefly. Inside, I checked the champagne, ran a hand along hallway. Wainscot memorized the hush that settles before a storm. I left before the staff unlocked the lobby, parking 2 streets away in a rented sedan, waiting. At 6:42 p.m., Helena's white Audi rolled in. Her husband, Marcus, stepped out first, All Vineyard Vines confidence, the children tumbling after sandy hair and entitlement. Mom arrived in Rory's SUV, eyes hidden behind ocean-tinted lenses. They hauled matching luggage toward the concierge desk, laughter spilling like predictable dialogue. Until the clerk shook her head. "I'm sorry. None of your names are on the reservation. Are you with Miss Ris Langley's party?" Helena froze. "I'm sorry, who's?" "Miss Langley, full property booking." The silence snapped taut, not dramatic surgical. I stepped from the car, heels tapping the tile like punctuation. "Clarification," I said, voice calm as receding tide. "I'm Miss Langley, deed, finalized 14 days ago." Helena's jaw set. "You bought Dad's house." "Yes," Mom blinked, voice a quaver. "But why?" "Because absence is not the same as insignificance." I handed my ID to the clerk. "Please escort anyone not on my guest list with courtesy." No shouting followed, just the hard hush of people rearranged. They left the lobby with stiff shoulders. I watched only long enough to see them vanish behind the rose hedge, then turned to sign the welcome ledger, spelling my name. Slowly, deliberately, like a tide, etching rock. I thought that would be the loudest chapter yet. Dawn brought a local news van parked beyond the dunes, a reporter rehearsing scandal about a daughter exploiting a dying father. I didn't open the door, didn't defend my pulse to strangers. Instead, I emailed Savannah everything. Title clause, tax lapses, screenshots of family threads calling me fragile, and one video from 2 summers back, Dad in a wool blanket whispering, "I want Iris to have this place. Helena loves noise. Iris loves legacy." By noon, the slanted headline disappeared, replaced by a quiet correction. No one reads, yet everyone remembers. My phone stopped sparking, silence, breathing easier again. Sienna called. "They'll take you to court, I know," I whispered. "Let them call my name in a room where the record doesn't forget." I closed my eyes, listened to the porch swing, creak, one slow pull, like the house itself sighed. Welcome home. The air in St. Eulalia always shifted before a storm. Not violently, not theatrically, just enough to make the tide retreat too far and the birds fall silent mid-song. I stood on the back porch with the old tin thermometer rattling in a crosswind. The sky a dull bruise above me, gray not with rain, but with reckoning. By mid-morning, Helena had begun her counter-assault. Not through lawyers, not yet, but through guilt. The first email arrived under the subject line, "We should talk." "Iris, I still don't understand what you're doing or why, but I think this is something we can fix together. I'm staying at the Tides Motel until Sunday. Let's meet for coffee, just us, no drama. You're still my sister. H." I read it twice. Then once more aloud, her tone was precisely what I expected, thinly veiled diplomacy, half regret, half threat. She wanted to appear reasonable, to posture for an imaginary jury. But she couldn't help that final note. "You're still my sister," as if DNA was the moral high ground. I didn't reply, not out of pettiness, but because I needed silence to think, to hear my own pulse after years of being edited out of every version of the family narrative. Instead, I called Savannah. "She's starting her campaign," I said. Savannah didn't flinch. "Let her. Just remember they called you fragile, not absent. They knew you existed, they just preferred you quiet." After that, I took to the water, paddleboard in hand, slicing through early morning surf while the house groaned behind me, like it remembered too much. My father had taken me out here at low tide, teaching me to read the rips, not from fear, but fluency. "The ocean doesn't lie, baby girl," he used to say. "It just waits until you're paying attention." Each day, I returned calmer, stronger, more certain of my right to be here, not as an act of defiance, but reclamation. The house knew me, remembered my bare feet and salt-crusted hair, my habit of hiding old poems between the floorboards of the attic. I found one yellowed, forgotten in my own handwriting. "My name is Tide, my breath is storm, I hold my name in fists still warm." They built the silence brick by brick, but I was born to break it quick. That night, I posted it anonymously to a local literary forum with the caption, "Found in a house that remembers what others try to forget." The next morning, it had 2,000 shares. Later that day, Miriam called. Not texted, not emailed, called a trembling olive branch. I didn't expect. I watched the screen flash her name for a full minute before answering. "Iris." Her voice was soft, almost unfamiliar. You shouldn't be alone out there with the press sniffing around. They're gone. I said I handled it. A pause. Then, you always did have your father's composure, she said, and it struck me as both compliment and curse. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, I said truthfully. I'm just awake. She exhaled. It was never supposed to be like this. I just didn't think you'd want it. You mean you didn't think I'd fight for it? I mean, she hesitated. You left Iris, you disappeared. I moved away. I got a job, I lived. That's not disappearance, that's distance. I didn't know how to reach you, she offered, but I heard the edge in her tone, the one that always blamed me for what they couldn't control. You didn't try, I replied. You just stopped including me, and that made things easier for everyone else. You've always been so sharp, she murmured, hard to handle. I'm not here to be handled. I said, I'm here because I belong. The silence stretched. Then she said, he would have wanted you both to share it. He told me otherwise, I said, and I have it in writing. She didn't speak again, and I didn't push. We both knew that words were a poor currency now. After I hung up, I walked the perimeter of the house, not out of paranoia, but ritual. Checking the shutters, straightening wind chimes, cleaning sand from the porch swing that refused to stay still. The island's quiet was deeper than I remembered, less idyllic, more feral, as if even the earth was rooting for me to finish what had begun. On Sunday, I found a letter on the doormat, not mailed, just placed likely by Helena herself. Thick paper gold-edged her monogram embossed in the corner like a brand. Inside, I don't hate you. I hate that you think we forgot you. We just didn't know how to include you. You always made things complicated. But maybe that's what Dad loved about you. If you want to talk before the lawyers get involved, I'm still at Tides. I folded the letter neatly and placed it under a glass paperweight shaped like a shipwreck. That evening, I sat on the back deck with a notebook listing everything they had ever said I was difficult, unpredictable, fragile, too quiet, too loud, too intense, too ambitious, too much. And then on the opposite page, I listed who I had become. Loyal, exact, self-made, enduring, honest, ocean-hearted, whole. It wasn't revenge I was living out. It was restoration. Helena still saw me as a threat because she had only ever known herself through contrast. If I was nothing, she was everything. If I rose, she shrank. But this time, I wasn't rising for her to witness. I was rising because the house was no longer holding its breath. That night, I returned to the attic and opened the old chest in the corner. Inside, a faded quilt, a broken compass, and a cassette tape labeled Iris Keep. I dusted off an old player and pressed play. The voice that emerged was cracked but familiar. Iris, my father rasped. This house is yours because it knows you. You listen when others talk. You see when others pose. Don't let them dilute you. Take the storm, make it language. I sat in the attic moonlight, pouring through the window, heart full of something too large for grief, too quiet for vengeance. They had tried to forget me, but the tide doesn't forget. The tide remembers everything, and now it had brought me home. It was Helena who finally made the mistake, not loud or reckless. Just one of those offhanded maneuvers people make when they still believe the world belongs to them by default. A cease and desist letter signed in quick strokes by her lawyer in Charleston, delivered by courier on a Monday afternoon, as if it were flowers from a suitor. I read it twice in the kitchen, the salt air curling the edges before I even finished the last page. Unlawful occupation it claimed, undue influence over an incapacitated elder, accusations constructed in legalese designed to wound without evidence. I poured myself a glass of water, then pulled out my own file folder, thick with affidavits, tax statements, scanned images of the lapse notices my mother had signed but never read. I placed them side by side on the table, their weight uneven, and I smiled. Not smug, not spiteful, just with the calm of someone holding the whole truth in her hands. Instead of replying through Sienna, I went in person. Tides Motel was 5 miles inland, its parking lot hot and cracked, Helena's Audi idling under a sunburned palm tree. I knocked once on room 213 and waited. She opened the door in a linen robe, full makeup at 4 p.m. You came, she said as if I were a delayed package she half expected to lose in transit. You sent the letter, I replied. I thought we should speak face to face. Inside the room was air-conditioned and stale. The kind of blandness no money can polish. She poured herself a drink gin, I noted too early and too strong. I just don't understand why you'd do this, she said without turning. You haven't even been here for years. You moved away. You became... Her voice caught slightly corporate. I became stable. I said, that's different. She handed me a glass, which I declined. You could have told us, she said. You could have given us time. You mean time to sell it under my feet. Her expression cracked for half a second, then reset into diplomacy. We were going to discuss it. When I asked before or after the listing went live, Helena took a long sip. You always did love dramatics. No, I said I loved Dad, and unlike the rest of you, I listened to what he actually said. She scoffed, but it lacked conviction. He wasn't himself those last few years. Iris, you know that. The stroke changed him. It didn't change what he wanted, I said, and for the first time, I let her see the fire in me, banked, focused, enduring. He wanted the house to go to someone who would protect it, not liquidate it for cash and convenience. She looked away, her voice sharp now. You think you're better than us. No, I said, I think I'm done trying to be like you. She stood there for a long time, glass in hand, and for a moment I saw her. Not the curated version she wore at family reunions, but the woman behind the perfection, tired, competitive brittle. You were always Dad's favorite, she said, voice low. He never made me a shell or read me poetry. He looked at you like you were a secret. He was proud of keeping. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty but mercy, because some truths don't require validation. They simply settle like silt in deep water. I left her standing in that room surrounded by air that smelled like regret and perfume. I didn't slam the door. I didn't write a monologue. I just walked out. At home, I lit every candle in the living room, opened all the windows, and let the ocean breeze carry the past out strand by strand. The next morning, I called a preservation specialist, a woman named Eleonora, who restored historic homes with reverence, not vanity. She walked through the house with me, brushing her fingers along the banisters like she was reading Braille. This place has bones, she said, not just wood and plaster memory. I want to keep it alive, I told her, but I don't want to erase its bruises. She nodded, understanding immediately. Restoration, not revision. We made plans, refinished the floors, replace the roof shingles with ones that match the original pattern, update the wiring, but leave the original fixtures in place. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was an inheritance of spirit. And people started showing up, not the family I'd left behind, but the ones I'd gathered in my own storms. Sienna flew in with her toolkit brain. Savannah brought her partner and a crate of heirloom cuttings for the garden. Even Marcus, Helena's husband, emailed me discreetly. I'm sorry for the letter. I didn't support it. If you ever want someone to help maintain the porch beams, I know a good carpenter. I didn't reply, but I bookmarked the number. Then came the letter from the Historical Society. My anonymous poem had reached them, and they wanted to include the Langley Whitford house in their fall exhibit, Homes That Remember. I stood in the attic with the news dust catching light like gold flakes, and I laughed, not the bitter kind, but the kind that comes from surviving something whole. I thought about writing to Helena, offering her a visit, maybe even peace. But then I paused, because sometimes the most gracious thing we can do is let people sit with their own choices uninterrupted. By the time the first cold front rolled in from the sea, the house was different. Not gentrified, not tamed, just honest. It breathed better, like it had finally been allowed to exhale. I started holding writing workshops in the sunroom, local women, teenagers, a few older men with shaking hands and stories too large for silence. We wrote about memory, about erasure, about rising without applause. Sophie from the bakery down the street read a piece about her mother's third job and her own dream of designing sneakers. You think I could ever go to college? She asked. I looked her in the eye and said, the tide brought me back from further than that. So yes, you can. And in that moment, I realized this was the inheritance I was meant to carry forward. Not just the deed, not just the square footage, but the echo of my father's voice saying, make it language. And the storm no longer frightened me, because I'd become the kind of woman who doesn't flinch when lightning strikes the sea. I learned that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the echo of what used to fill it. And in this house now, mine now awake, the silence had begun to feel sacred, not hollow, not angry, just full like a page waiting for the next sentence. Autumn thickened around the island. Sea oats swayed like secrets along the dunes. And each morning I woke to the sound of wind fingers brushing the old shutters. The house had softened in its edges since Eleonora's team finished the first phase of restoration. The floor no longer creaked in protest but sang low and steady like it recognized its own name again. Sienna stayed with me the first weekend of November, her suitcase rolling across the refinished boards. "It's strange," she said as we lit the fireplace, "how something can hold trauma and comfort in the same breath." "Like people," I replied, pouring her tea. "We learned to carry both." That night we sat on the porch swing Dad once fixed after a hurricane pulled it halfway into the sea. Sienna told me about her sister, about how their last conversation had ended in silence and how they hadn't spoken in 5 years. "I used to think she was my anchor," she said. "Now I think she was just the first wave I learned to fight." We said nothing for a long while. After that, the stars didn't need our commentary. The article came out the next day. The Historical Society featured the Langley Whitford house in a spread called Homes with a Heartbeat, a 2-page essay titled "The Woman Who Returned Without Permission." They called me brave, but I didn't feel brave reading it. I felt precise, seen, like someone had finally heard the pulse I'd been pressing beneath my ribs all these years. Helena read it too. I knew because she forwarded it to Savannah, still playing silent observer on the family group thread, where Helena's comment read, "She always did know how to make things poetic. No bitterness, no praise, just a sentence tossed into the current." But I caught it and I folded it away in my memory with everything else I never needed her to say. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email, not a text, an envelope in pale gray stationery with her script on the front, soft and hesitant. Inside, just a page. "I read what you wrote. I watched what you made of that house. I was wrong about the kind of woman you'd become. Maybe because I never understood the kind of girl you were. If you want me to come, I will. I'll bring nothing, just myself." I sat on the stairs with the letter in my lap, my breath uneven, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't feel the ache I thought I would. Forgiveness had never been the goal. It was clarity, and this was a kind of clarity I could live with. I waited 3 days before I answered. My reply was short. "You can come, but you have to sit in the back room first, the one with the tide maps and the silence. That's where I kept myself for years. I want you to feel what that was like." She didn't respond, but on the first Sunday in December, a rental car pulled into the drive. Miriam Langley stepped out wearing a coat too light for the weather. Her hair pulled back, no pearls, no armor. She stood at the foot of the porch and didn't move, didn't call my name, just waited. I opened the door slowly and nodded. She followed me inside like a woman entering a chapel she once ridiculed. I led her to the back room, the small study Dad once used for maps and muttering over tide calendars. I had left it mostly untouched, just dusted, and cleared a space for a single chair. "This is it," I said. "Where I used to listen from behind doors after you told Helena I was too sensitive to be trusted with real things." She didn't argue, didn't deny it. She sat, folded her hands, and said, "It's colder than I remember. That's because you only stepped inside when it suited you." Silence again, and this time it didn't scream. It mourned. "I thought I was protecting you," she said finally. "But I was just protecting the idea I had of what you should be." I nodded once. "We're both here now. That's something." She stayed for 20 minutes. Then she stood, and before leaving, she said, "You sound like him when you speak like that, measured, patient, exact." I learned from his silences, I replied, "And yours." That was the last time I saw her. The following week, I hosted the first public writing salon in the sunroom. The glass caught the winter light just right, casting long shadows across the floorboards. The room filled with stories, some broken, some boiling, some healing as they were spoken. And as they read, I felt it again. The pulse of this house, its breath matched to mine. One woman wrote about escaping a cult at 17. Another about reclaiming her name after 20 years of being called wife and mother and never once herself. We cried, we laughed, we let silence follow stories without rushing to fill it. After they left, I stood by the window, the house quiet again. And I thought maybe I never needed them to say I belonged. Maybe I just needed to stop asking. I wasn't the storm anymore. I was the shoreline. After reshaped, resolute, still standing, winter came in slow waves on the island. Not with snow, but with that heavy sky and brittle wind that made you draw your cardigan tighter even when the temperature wasn't low. I welcomed the hush. It brought the way it softened the chaos of the past into something I could finally shelve. Not erase, not forget, just close like a chapter whose final sentence had already been underlined. The house had settled, and so had I, not in a way that meant giving up, but in a way that meant giving in to truth, to rhythm, to peace that no longer depended on anyone's permission. I began each morning with tea on the back porch, wrapped in my father's old navy blanket, the one he kept in the Jeep during hurricane seasons. The ocean looked different now, not less wild, just less threatening, as if it had recognized me too. The workshops had grown. Savannah brought in a poet from Charleston, then a queer historian who specialized in ancestral trauma. Even Eleonora joined one afternoon. Her paint-smeared hands curled around a mug, sharing a story about her mother, who never let her speak during dinner. Every woman had a silence they were taught to carry like good posture, and here in this space we were learning to slouch, to soften, to spill. Then the call came, not from Helena, not from my mother, but from the Historical Society. They wanted to nominate the Langley Whitford House for the state registry. Not just for its structure, but for what it had become, a living archive of personal reclamation. I said yes, but only if they listed both names on the placard, mine and my father's. Ris Langley and Frederick Whitford, 1988 to always. When I told Sienna, she cried, not because of the honor, but because it meant that the version of me the world once ignored was now permanent. She said, "It's not a monument to survival, Iris. It's a monument to response." Helena never responded to the final decision, but her silence felt less like dismissal now and more like surrender. Not the kind that asks for war, the kind that knows there's nothing left to win. On the last Sunday of the year, I held a gathering. Not a party, no catered shrimp towers or country club chatter, but a shared table, local bread figs, wine, handwritten place cards with quotes from the writers we'd read together all season. Sophie from the bakery brought her mother, who said, "I used to be afraid of women who looked like you. Confident, alone, unbothered," and I laughed. Not in mockery, but in recognition. "That was the mask," I said. "The real me is just tired and finally safe." After everyone left, I sat on the floor of the study. The tide maps spread across the rug, tracing the swell and fade of water I could not control, but could always expect. That's what I had become, predictable, only in my refusal to recede. I wrote one final letter, not to be mailed, not for them to read, but for myself to close what still lingered. To the version of me who begged to be seen. You were never invisible. You were camouflaged in expectation, cloaked in apology, softened into someone else's comfort zone. But you endured. You gathered every slight, every silence, every cropped-out photo, and taught them to speak in your own language. You didn't burn bridges. You built new ones across oceans, only you could navigate. I see you. Now I've always seen you. Welcome home. I folded the letter and slid it into the floorboard under the window, where I used to hide poetry as a child. Some artifacts don't need audiences, just acknowledgement. That night I dreamed of my father again, only this time. He wasn't younger, wasn't vibrant. He was exactly as he'd been near the end, slower, but not diminished. He was sitting in the porch swing, arms folded, that shell I kept on the mantel resting on his palm. "You found the rhythm," he said. "I did," I answered. He smiled, wind rustling the sleeve of his old fishing jacket. "So now what?" And I answered him in the dream, same as I did when I woke. Now I live. I live without shrinking, without needing the mirror of other people's comfort to validate my shape. I live without asking if I'm too much or too little, too sharp or too quiet. I live knowing that I left, and I came back, and the story I wrote with my body was one they could never revise. Because the tide didn't erase me, it returned me.